joining us remotely. Welcome to the discussion, Closing the Gap. How can access to renewable energy support sustainable, equitable COVID-19 recovery in Africa? The event today is hosted by the Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the United Nations with the support of the Independent Evaluation Office of the UN Development Programme. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you today our host, His Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande, the Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Ambassador Bande will welcome you now at the event.
Thank you very much indeed. It's my honor to be part of this really important conversation, which is really a side event at the margins of the high-level political forum. This event being hosted by the Independent Evaluation Office of the United Nations Development Programme, supported by our mission, but also supported by our sister mission, Mission of Malawi to the United Nations. That colleagues are joined both virtually and also in person. Mine is the easiest to simply acknowledge that this event may be side event or side event, but it's really central to the attainment of SDGs. Very few things are as important as energy in getting good outcomes in our effort to really achieve the SDGs. And any discussion that will get us to action that is irreversible and sustainable in relation to renewable energy will be extremely important to the development of the continent of Africa. And I must say, all other continents. Certainly, for me, a privilege to be part of the conversation, and my hope and expectation is that the conversation will give us ideas concerning not only the obstacles, which we really know a lot about, but also galvanize us into practical action that will make it less and less a problem in relation to the gap, not only now, but post-COVID. It's my honor to be part of the conversation, and I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists here today. We have here in the room Her Excellency Mrs. Agnes Mary Chibiri Malandi, the Permanent Representative of Malawi to the United Nations. We have His Excellency Mr. George Idi Amin Adopa, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the United Nations. Joining us over Zoom, we have Mr. Rashid Ali Abdallah, the Executive Director of the African Energy Commission, and Ms. Sheila Oparacha, Chair of the Technical Advisory Group on Sustainable Development Goal 7 and Executive Director of Energia, the International Network on Gender and Sustainable Energy, who is also joining us remotely. Back in the room, we have Ms. Usha Rao Manari, the Undersecretary General of the United Nations and the UN Development Programme's Associate Administrator, and Mr. Oscar A. Garcia, here to my left, the Director of the Independent Evaluation Office of the UN Development Programme. As Ambassador Bande so succinctly put, energy is very much the golden thread that joins the mission to achieve the SDGs. And building on the recent evaluation of UNDP's support to energy access undertaken by the Independent Evaluation Office, the panel will discuss ways to ensure sustainable energy supply in Africa, using examples of support to households and community services. Mr. Oscar Garcia will set the scene for our discussion with three critical issues arising from the evaluation. The floor is yours, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Kate, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's a real pleasure to be in person today, and we are very thankful to our host, gracious host, the Mission of Nigeria to the United Nations, and to Ambassador Bande for his kind hospitality. It's also a great pleasure to be connected with so many participants who are interested in such an important topic. Our event today is framed as a dialogue, so that we can really benefit from the wealth of expertise we have in our panel and use the evaluated evidence coming from an independent report to share lessons and promote accountability and learning. And this is mainly a learning event. Our topic could not be more important. As African countries recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, how do we ensure that we reach universal access to energy and also achieve it in a way that is sustainable, equitable, and drives the achievement of other sustainable development goals. Although significant progress has been made in the past decade, globally, 759 million people still lack access to electricity. And 2.4 billion people remain without affordable clean cooking options. At the same time, the energy sector remains the dominant contributor to global warming, producing approximately 60% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. As of 2018, 74% of the supply of electricity is coming from non-renewable sources, and only 26% from renewable energy sources, including hydropower, wind power, biopower, and solar PV. Additionally, the impact that COVID-19 has had on our trajectory to SDG 7 is concerning. The International Energy Agency estimated that in 2020, up to 90 million people in Africa and Asia lost the ability to afford an extended package of energy services. Many governments in Africa provide subsidies to make energy more affordable to households and businesses. But the cost of these subsidies has doubled since 2020 as fuel prices rise and countries face even greater constraints on their fiscal space and their ability to invest public resources. Therefore, a monumental scale up is required to grant equitable and sustainable access to renewable energy in Africa. Bearing in mind, however, that every crisis presents an opportunity, to frame our discussions today, I would like to ask our distinguished panelists to kindly share their perspectives on three of the most critical questions emerging from our evaluation. Firstly, how do we ensure that the drive to reach universal energy access promotes human-centered solutions and powers sustainable development agenda? Secondly, how do we use renewable and efficient energy solutions to further strengthen African expertise, and especially to promote women's contribution to the energy sector? And thirdly, how do we ensure that distributed energy solutions are affordable and sustainable over time? I look forward to hearing from our panelists' perspectives on all these three questions, and many thanks for being with us today. Back to you, Kate.
Thank you very much, Oscar. One key question remains. What does this mean for people's everyday lives on the African continent? For the perspective from Malawi, I now hand the floor to Ambassador Malandi. The floor is yours, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be part of this very, very important discussion. Allow me to share first and foremost the message from our chair of the SADC, President of the Republic of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus McCarthy Jagweri, who conveyed to participants of 51st Plenary Assembly of the SADC Parliamentary Forum. He said, I quote, "Lasting solutions to energy challenges in the SADC region is facing need to be found as the problems pose a threat to democracy." I think this is a very, very important statement that the president made this week. And he further says progress cannot be achieved with the erratic supply of electricity to people in the region. So I felt I could start with that message, and just also to mention that today's discussion, very important word is sustainable. And according to the report on the independent evaluation, it entails sustainable access to energy. It entails people's energy needs being met successfully, considering the varying needs of people of different ages and abilities in different locations, and the specific needs of men and women. This is what we should bear in mind as we are discussing today. So for the first question, in terms of how we can drive to reach universal energy access to promoting human-centered solutions and powers sustainable development goals. From the Malawi perspective, we need to ensure that energy interventions are aimed at achieving universal energy access, considering the whole list of human energy needs, ranging from domestic needs, productive activities, and service delivery. In Malawi, energy interventions are targeting households as well as productive services, such as businesses, irrigation, water pumping, and public institutions, including hospitals and schools. This means we target all sectors that play a crucial role in the achievement of sustainable development. However, what is critical is ensuring energy supply efficiency and effectiveness. Further, secondly, the drive to achieve universal access to energy can power sustainable economic gains by ensuring that first, by encouraging only clean energy technologies that do not cause any harm to the environment. For example, in Malawi, Malawi has taken a bold step to decommission the 78 megawatts of emergency and backup diesel generators in favor of renewable energy technologies, such as solar, combined with battery energy storage systems. Second, by encouraging the use of distributed energy solutions, such as mini-grids and solar home systems, which are cost-effective means of powering most rural areas that are isolated and far from the national grid. These are areas where most rural people reside and are engaged in small-scale economic activities using traditional tools that are inefficient and laborious. Distributed energy solutions can be implemented in modular and accessed by everyone according to level of income and scale of economic activities. Powering these rural areas in this way ensures that productivity of rural people increases sustainably, thereby improving their social and economic well-being. In Malawi, we have an example of one village, Sitolo village. There's a Sitolo mini grid. It has changed the lives of the people, access to health services, because the health clinic has been given access to mini grid. Further, rural areas that have access to solar power are able to have connectivity due to their capability to charge phones, and others are accessing solar lights at reasonable prices, and small businesses are able to stay open late. For the second question, in terms of how we use renewable and efficient solutions to further strengthen African expertise and especially to promote women's contributions to energy sector, the perspective from Malawi is that first, we need to build capacity in both men and women on renewable and efficient energy technologies. This capacity building is cross-sectional. In education sector, we need to improve girls' access to science, technology, and innovation. And in private sector, build capacities of small and medium enterprises by facilitating their access to energy services to boost their businesses. In governance sector, for example, ensure female scientists or energy experts in leadership positions to participate in energy policy decision-making processes. We have an example of our principal secretary in the energy ministry. It's a woman, and I think that's why we are able to have more of the renewable energy sources projects. Ensuring also that women at both community and national levels are part and parcel of planning, implementing, managing, monitoring, and evaluation of interventions involving renewable energy and efficient and energy efficient solutions. For example, the government collaborates with non-governmental organizations such as National Association of Business Women to build capacity and raise awareness of women in businesses on renewable energy technologies and how they can be used to boost their businesses. For example, women are involved in waste management, where they turn waste management into something that they can sell to, like manure. For the third question, on as governments, development partners, and the private sector start to deliver on their energy compacts, how do we ensure that distributed energy solutions are affordable and sustainable? In Malawi, we are proposing 4 ways. One, by integrating public and private funds into financing of distributed energy solutions. Public financing such as tax subsidies and grants would ensure affordability of distributed energy solutions while integrating private financing into the funding of distributed energy solutions with good business models, thus ensuring their sustainability. In Malawi, distributed energy solutions components such as solar panels, batteries, and inverters are exempted from duty and VAT, just to ensure affordability of the solar and renewable energy technologies. Further, World Bank under the Malawi Electricity Access Project has offered financial support to the Ministry of Energy to distribute solar products to 200,000 households through debt and result-based grants to off-grid solar companies in Malawi. The second one is ensuring that there is good and streamlined legal and regulatory framework for distributed energy solutions. And third, ensure that standardization of distributed energy solutions are enforced to ensure quality, reliable, and sustainability and use of these distributed energy solutions. And finally, fourth, ensure that end user education is part and parcel of business models for distributed energy solutions for their sustainable use. I just want to raise a bit 2 challenges and 2 opportunities that we have. One challenge that we are facing as Malawi and Africa in general is unavailability of resources for scaling up the human-centered energy solutions that have proved to change people's lives. Currently, much of the solutions remain at project level, target level. So they do not reach the whole population that needs energy services. The second challenge is poverty. The majority of those needing energy cannot make ends meet. They struggle to meet their basic needs, and therefore paying for energy services cannot be a priority. This is why, as you mentioned, governments in Africa subsidize energy. Now, what opportunities do we have that we can grab to use and build on? The increased appetite for science, technology, and innovation in post-COVID recovery provides an opportunity to do the needful to ensure investor access to energy solutions. 2, the traction for climate action through various climate financing mechanisms like LOCAL, which is local climate adaptivity living that UNCDF is providing to local governments is an opportunity. Climate green bonds, another opportunity. Water blue bonds, another opportunity for integrating public and private financing of energy solutions. EU, World Bank, and UN are prepared to support the bonds, and that's another opportunity for Africa and Malawi in particular. And also the spillover to Africa of the impact of Ukraine war creates another opportunity. Africa needs to governize itself. Africa needs political will at highest level to have a special fund that ensures that barriers to achieving sustainable energy solutions are managed. Malawi, we have what we call Build Malawi Fund that is supporting various businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those excellent and insightful points. To build on the perspective from Malawi, we're going to move thousands of miles to the northwest, to Nigeria. Ambassador Adopa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. Excellencies, members of the panel, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first of all thank Independent Evaluation Office for this event. In relation to the first question, I wish to underscore the importance of a centered approach to universal energy access. It's point out that solutions which do not focus on the realities of vulnerable populations would be ineffective at achieving sustainable development needs. In this regard, I wish to reaffirm Nigeria's commitment to maintain strong institutions and partnerships with the aim of creating adequate energy access. As part of Nigeria's COVID-19 strategy, recovery strategy, Rural Electrification Agency, REA, has deployed vast resources of knowledge, networking, infrastructure to create off-grid energy solutions. These solutions would create grid energy. These solutions would create life-saving energy access in health clinics, especially in remote areas across the country. Moreover, the establishment of the NEP bridged the energy access efficiency by providing electricity to households, educational and healthcare facilities in rural communities. To ensure the sustainability of Nigeria's off-grid solutions, EP has deployed mini-grid solution home systems, captive power plants, and productive use appliances. Furthermore, I wish to reiterate the cooperation of energy experts, non-governmental organizations, and civil society as a multi-stakeholder approach to universal energy access process. The inclusion of the relevant stakeholders guarantees that the process is investigated, is domesticated. This inclusion of relevant stakeholders will guarantee that the process is domesticated by member states. There's also a need to strengthen the UN institutions to ensure member states' commitment to sustainable development goals. I wish to stress the particularity of the challenge faced by African countries and take into consideration the realities of the global south, as well as to underscore the need of official development assistance towards energy transition programs and projects in Africa. It's important to highlight the significance of exploring innovative areas of renewable energy that addresses the impacts of climate change. In line with the Paris Agreement on climate change, Nigeria has adopted an energy transition plan to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. As a country rich in oil and gas, Nigeria is diversifying from fossil fuel dependency to implementing solar energy solutions. And also, it is critical to reform of Nigeria's economic sustainability program, which is designed to deliver and maintain 5 million new solar connections under a solar power strategy. The strategy supports 250,000 new jobs and impacts up to 25 million beneficiaries through the installation of 5 million solar home systems and mini grids. The plan also supports the upstream value chain by promoting the large-scale assembly of solar panels in Nigeria. In response to the second question, I just wish to emphasize the need for increased women participation in the different areas of the energy sector. As studies have shown that supporting women's innovative ideas will lead to further improvement and exploration of new areas of research in renewable energy technologies, especially in electricity, oil and gas. It's very important to state that women's participation in African energy industry is below the statistics compared to the global energy market, despite the fact that women account for almost half of the global workforce. Women only contribute 32% to the renewable energy sector. This actually may be due to burdens of women. Therefore, there is need for the international community to develop structures and create incentives aimed at encouraging greater women involvement in bridging the gap, the gender gap in this sector. And I wish to underscore the need for improvement to access renewable energy and efficient solutions at household level to reduce the burden of domestic chores. Introducing efficient energy solutions at domestic level will improve time management and productivity, as well as increased participation in the Energy National Strategy plans targeted at women. In this regard, I wish to inform of Nigeria's National Action Plan for the implementation of ECOWAS policy for gender mainstreaming in energy access. The plan seeks to empower women throughout the value chain by changing social practices associated with women in energy. The action plan addresses gender gaps and improves gender inclusion in the sector. More importantly, I wish to stress the importance of sustainable energy education courses targeted at women and provide scholarship opportunities to all at all levels. It is also pertinent to fund energy research projects by women aimed at improving energy sufficiency within the industry. Sufficient academic participation and technological knowledge transfer will provide strong foundation for increased participation in the energy workforce, especially in leadership positions. Moreover, it is vital to highlight the need for African states to develop friendly policies that create an enabling environment and promote the growth of renewable sectors, as well as provide technical support for women-owned businesses. This support system will guarantee capacity building and drive investment opportunities in the continent. With respect to the third question, I wish to underscore that access to affordable and sustainable energy solutions are essential for national development, while noting that public resources are insufficient. States are encouraged to engage with private investments to boost economic resources as a strategy to recover from the effect of the COVID pandemic. And it is key to highlight the fact that international financial institutions, regional and local development banks should de-risk energy projects as well as improve access to credit facilities for renewable energy projects in the continent. Moreover, the innovative financing approach such as local currency lending, result-based financing systems, or tailor-made challenges funds would facilitate states' energy transition, propelling enough economic growth. In addition to this, I wish to stress the need for the developed country to contribute financially to Africa's energy transition. Commencement of our energy transition plan should inform that Nigeria requires about $400 billion of new investment to meet its net zero target by 2060. This is a good place to reiterate that investment in innovative technology such as green, hydrogen, and ensure that distributed energy solutions are affordable and sustainable along the value chain. I wish to underline the need to strengthen and modernize grid infrastructures in Africa. Many African countries have inadequate grid infrastructures designed to accommodate conventional energy resources, resulting in high electricity losses and low supply quality, among others. These issues are a barrier to upscaling inexpensive, variable, renewable energy such as solar and wind. At the view of breaking those infrastructure barriers, planning, operation, and maintenance of electricity grids are paramount to energy transition and grid stabilization. And I wish to emphasize here that energy subsidies can be pursued in order to provide affordable energy for low-income member states. In this respect, I wish to inform of the solar power Niger project as part of Nigeria's economic sustainability plan aimed at expanding energy access to 25 million individuals. In brackets, we have 5 new connections in this regard. This is achieved through the provision of solar home systems or connection to a mini grid, increased local content in the off-grid solar value chain, as well as facilitating the growth of the local manufacturing industries. And it incentivizes the creation of 250 new jobs in the energy sector. In conclusion, I wish to just underscore that harnessing renewable energy as a system approach is essential to creating affordable and sustainable energy. Therefore, states can adopt innovative power generating technologies such as renewable power systems, as well as off-grid renewable energy system for energy access within the communities. In addition, new businesses models, improved regulatory frameworks, and system operations are pertinent areas to consider for infrastructural development. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we've had two pictures from two different countries, many differences, but also many similarities in terms of the challenges faced, but also, and importantly, potential solutions. To complement this, we're now going to turn to the regional perspective. And our next speaker, Mr. Rashid Ali Abdallah, will speak from the perspective of the African Energy Commission, of which he is the director. Mr. Abdallah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would like, first of all, thank the host who allow us to participate in this very important discussion. So to address this question raised for us, actually, I feel that there are some important elements we need to look at when we talk about access to the to fill the gap of the access to universal access. I think the first of this element is the current situation, where we are now. And the second one is available resources. And the third one is demography and the cost of renewable energy. In the point of current situation, I just need to remind the audience that Africa is still home of 600 million without access to the electricity and 900 million without access to the clean cooking facility. And this make Africa is the only continent that the 50% of their energy plus depend on biomass, charcoal or firewood. And this also, it make Africa less contribution to the CO2 emission. And I think I recall that the cumulative contribution of whole Africa of CO2, it is account for 3 to 4%. And if we remove the major economy like Nigeria, Algeria, and Egypt and South Africa, the whole Africa account for less than 1% of CO2 emission. So this is a fact actually we need to look at. And when we come to the fossil fuel, the consumption per capita for oil product in Africa is less than a third of the global average. This is the reality now. But in the contrast, in terms of resource, Africa is very rich in terms of resource. The hydropower, I think Africa is account for 12% of the global feasible hydropower. Wind energy, I think 60% of the best solar energy sources, it is in Africa, despite the fact the PV installed capacity is between 1 and 2%. Wind energy is the same. We have a huge resource, geothermal energy. And last but not least, the natural gas. I just need to remind also the speakers that in the last 10 years, 40% of new discovery of natural gas in Africa, mainly in Senegal, Mozambique, Mauritania, and other countries. And since the natural gas considered for the energy transition fuel, I think this resource needs to be considered very carefully when we talk about the energy access, universal energy access. In terms of demography, which is very important, we know that Africa now is represent like less than 20% of the global population, but with a very increased rates between 2010 to 2020, the African population increased by 26%. And we expect that in Africa, this number will double by 2050. And lastly, the last point is renewable energy. We know that the renewable energy costs now in Africa, especially solar, with reduction in the panel and reduction in the storage, now it's be competitive to any conventional sources of electricity. Having said that, I think to reach this universal access, we need to look at all this challenge and opportunity together. the huge gap of universal access and also the huge resource of energy resources, and also the demography, the people, and this very important asset when we come to the development. To fill this gap, in my opinion, I think we can consider several aspects that we need to look at as a government or a partner or private sector. First of all, financing. We cannot solve this energy access without sufficient financing. And when we talk financing, we talk about public finance, public-private partnership, and also we talk about the local market and international markets. And above all, the green funds. And I think Africa needs also to approach this fund very aggressively. The second aspect to fill this gap, I think it is, which is very important, is the regional integration. We know Africa is big. The resource is not in the same place. The country different from other country, region different from the other region. And I think we need to invest more in regional integration to improve the international or cross-border trading between African countries, so that the whole resources of energy in Africa is available for the all African people. And also in terms of policy and regulation framework, we need to really innovate or to develop attractive policy and regulatory framework, and to make sure these policies are regulatory harmonized among African countries, so that we facilitate trading on energy commodity, and also to support in terms of synergy between African countries. When we have harmonizing policy and regulatory framework, it is easy for African countries to trade among themselves. And the fourth element actually to be considered is research and development. And I think this we need to look at it. It is for a long time, this area, it is forgotten. But really, we need to link our research institute, Africa Research Institute, with the energy market and with all productive markets, with manufacturing. And also this needs investment, and we need to look at this point. The fifth one, I think, is still we need technology transfer and knowledge transfer. Still, there are some new technology, hydrogen or other technology that Africa need to step in, and this we cannot do it without knowledge and technology transfer and cooperation between Africa and other regions in the world, so that we can go fast on this area. The sixth one, I think, is manufacturing. So Africa is still, we are end users, or we are just use the technology. But really, we need to think carefully how to invest in manufacturing of renewable energy equipment and facility in Africa. And this really will help us to make this sustainable energy or increasing access of the sustainable energy. It is more linked with our social development and economic development. And also the point number 7, I think, is the capacity building. I highly appreciate Her Excellency, the Minister of Malawi. We highlight that we need really capacity building. We are in the era of energy transition. We know that new technology is coming. That means will affect the current utility. They affect the business as usual. Now we are dealing with in electricity, and this need capacity building in all levels, from decision maker up to the technician. And I think this is a very important one. And last but not least, I think one of the most important elements we need to highlight, we need energy for production, because we have very dynamic population, we have young people, we need to create job for them, and we need to concentrate this energy, supply of energy, it is for production, so that this energy can contribute to the socio-economic development, they can contribute to the job production for our young population, and also to make this energy transition, it is like something sustainable by itself. In terms of lesson learned, I think I will not take more, but I think Africa also, we have also good news. Africa, I think, is the home of the biggest PV power plant in Egypt, with a total capacity of 1.8 gigawatts. And also this in Egypt. And Africa also is home of the biggest concentrated solar energy power plant in Morocco, which is really, it is something give example for others. And also we can look also at the experience of South Africa. They create a very innovative way of how to transform their energy system and produce innovative policies that attract investment from international market and local market. And now I think they reach about 6,000 megawatt, and still this evolving. And I think we need to look at these three example. And last but not least, the example of Kenya in terms of geothermal. Also, it is also a unique experience that people, they need to look out. So in general, yes, we have a very huge challenge, but we have opportunity. We have very good resources, and just we need to match what this gap and with this resource, and also to make this element work together to enable us to reach the universal access by 2030 or even beyond by 2030. And I think by this I will conclude my intervention, and I'm happy to receive any question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdallah. Now we're starting to see the picture really build up here from country to country and across the region. We see the golden threads of energy and how they connect everybody together. And before we bring into play the last pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, the development perspective, we've just learned there are 160 people joining us online. And as Mr. Abdallah said, we'll have a chance to ask questions to our panel at the end of today's proceedings. You can submit them to my colleagues here through the chat. So first to speak on the development perspective is Ms. Sheila Operacha, who will speak from the perspective of the Technical Advisory Group for Sustainable Development Goal 7, of which she is the chair. As we all know, Sustainable Development Goal 7 is affordable and clean energy. Ms. Operacha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to participate in this very important event amongst this very distinguished panel of speakers. I'm most honored. As already been mentioned by the other excellent interventions that we have had, energy is an enabler for sustainable development. And thus delivering energy access that is human-centered means energy that delivers on all the sustainable development goals. Firstly, this implies that we cannot have a binary measure of energy access, of whether you're connected or not. But we need to look at energy service delivery as multidimensional in terms of the quality of the energy, ensuring that's affordable, that it's safe, and that we have resilient energy systems and are mindful of the level of access provided. For example, in Pakistan, Perisha Valley, the Aga Khan Rural Support Program upgraded a small hydro plant capacity from 50 kilowatts, which is mostly what you find at the transformers in most rural communities, to 800 kilowatts. After this, rural households could invest in high-end energy appliances, such as washing machines, which reduced women's drudgery and the time they spent hand washing clothes from 6 hours to 2 hours. Households also had the opportunity to start using electrical appliances for churning butter, cooking meals, and for heating purposes. Secondly, for developing countries, and especially for those in Africa, delivering human-centered energy solutions that power sustainable development means providing energy that is both a public good that ensures people's right to basic services, but also providing energy in a manner that creates wealth for the people and for the continent, in terms of, like we've heard before, productive uses as a driver for entrepreneurship and for industrial development. In doing so, we also have to factor in the leaving no one behind principle and the reality of the growing economic divide between those who have and have not. Thus, in all our interventions and investments, we need to assess who this energy is creating wealth for, making sure it is inclusive of women and vulnerable groups and supports jobs and entrepreneurship of our young people. After all, most Africans are below the age of 35. When planning for energy in this manner, we can then factor in issues such as how do you address geographical gaps and get three-phase connections for business and community services, hospitals and schools in rural areas? How do we plan for investments in infrastructure that meet our development aspirations and are not limited to what people can only use today? Thirdly, let me add, we cannot deliver human-centered solutions without a focus on clean cooking, which is particularly inclusive for catering energy access for rural and urban poor. For example, in Senegal, currently has an electrification rate of 64%, but only a clean cooking penetration rate of 31%. This is not unique to Senegal. This is a trend that we see across the continent. Key for leveling the playing field means increasing investments in clean cooking to the scale that we have in electricity. A good practice example is from Rwanda, where the Clean Cooking Fund from the World Bank provides $20 million that is being used to leverage an additional $30 million in public and private sector investments. This also implies, however, allocating accountability and responsibility for clean cooking in the same way that we have done for electricity, through key contact persons and departments of energy, by having dedicated institutions like rural electrification agencies and utilities. This should also be accompanied by similar supportive regulatory and legal frameworks for clean cooking, such as those for the electricity regulation boards, electricity acts, and the bylaws that we have. If I move to the second question about strengthening African expertise, just to complement the excellent contributions that have already been said, we are aware that the green energy sector is going to show the biggest growth in the next few decades. And so as such, there are opportunities, as we've heard from, for instance, Morocco and Egypt, where we have the opportunity to strengthen Africa's expertise to meet growing demand in the renewable energy and energy efficiency. To maximize this opportunity, we need to create a pipeline of employable skills, starting with reaching out to vocational and tertiary schools to build the human capital to drive these sectors. We need to look beyond the traditional talent pool and have affirmative targets for groups that are underrepresented in the sector, such as encouraging and supporting young women and talent found in rural areas to enter and stay in the renewable energy and energy efficiency jobs. Attracting and retaining this expertise means changing workplace policies and regulations to meet the needs and having clear pathways for career advancement. Other supportive measures could be including mentorship and role models so that women and youth can see themselves and can have people with similar life experience support them on their developmental journeys. Financing, as we've heard, is also part of the solution, which means ensuring that the potential pipeline of African skills and expertise have access to adequate and affordable capital to network and to link to markets. Energy programs and plans should include intentional and inclusive approaches that establish and build local entrepreneurs and jobs through procurement processes, venture capital processes, and results-based financing. In response to the third question about how distributed energy solutions are affordable and sustainable, well, the current crisis COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, the global economic turndown, inflation, have shown us that building domestic manufacturing and distribution is very important to resilience and ensuring affordability and sustainability. Unfortunately, in Africa, the current renewable energy deployment is very dependent on foreign supply chains. With the disruptions we have seen in global value chains, it has become clear that when push comes to shove, it is local companies that have the flexibility and adaptability to deliver and to innovate. But for local companies to do this effectively, we need to address the imbalance in which we currently see that much of the funding for Africa's decentralized solutions still goes to businesses owned and managed outside the continent. Governments, development partners, and the private sector need to work to creating an enabling environment for building locally owned African-led domestic markets. Sustainability is also about addressing where SDG 7 fits in the political narrative. As we near 2030, member states from the continent and from the international community need to address and deliberate how a just and inclusive energy transition becomes part of the post-2030 agenda. We're less than 7 years away to this. And indeed, as part of the net zero ambitions. The global roadmap for accelerated SDG 7 actions, an outcome of the 2021 high-level dialogue on energy held under the auspices of the General Assembly, provides an excellent political narrative that we can build on. Part of building on this political narrative is ensuring that we have a strong evidence base to inform policies and regulations. Currently, member states are deliberating on their progress towards SDG 5, for example, here with you there in New York at the high-level political forum. But we find that there's a big gap on indicators that measure progress on the interlinkages between SDGs and SDG 7. For example, out of the 17 SDGs, SDG 7 is one of the only 6 that has no gender-specific indicators. So how do we measure progress and gaps on inclusion and answer whether one is being left behind? We need data and statistics that embrace the leaving no one behind principle. To conclude, let me just congratulate Malawi and Nigeria for the best practice interventions that they have shared with us today that aim to position women and young people as agents of change for the energy revolution that we aspire for. I'm sure that these examples will act as incentives for other member states as part of your deliberations there at the 2022 High-Level Political Forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Operachi. Our final speaker today is Ms. Usha Manari, as UNDP's Assistant Administrator, who will present key initiatives and new approaches from the UN Development Programme. Ms. Manari, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kate. And First Excellencies, thank you for your wonderful remarks. I learned so much listening to you, and Sheila's absolutely right. I think that your cases of Malawi and Nigeria are really best practice that others should look at. So thank you very much for all of that, Excellencies. Honestly, all the points have been made, so I'm not sure what I can make, but let me give it a shot. I may not answer the questions as laid out, Oscar, I hope that's all right, but I will try to give you a sense of where UNDP stands on some of these issues and some of the things that we're doing. Energy and SDG 7 is a very important one for UNDP, and we have a lot of efforts, resources, expertise, and even technologies in making sure we address this particular SDG. When it comes to energy to Africa, the story is different and also very similar to the rest of the world. So let me talk about the Africa story. Let me start with access. Many of you spoke about access as one of the big issues in Africa, and it is. But if you look at the overall Africa energy story, I'd like to say, and I'd like to posit, that access is a big issue, but so is the need for a just and inclusive transition, and so is the need to include adaptation in addition to mitigation in their pathways towards decarbonization and green recovery and so on and so forth. far as access is concerned, I don't want to go to the some of the statistics, but they are stark in access. As everybody said, 600 million people still lack access to electricity on the continent. And this is something that is affecting not only development and growth, but it is simply affecting global achievement of our climate goals and our energy goals. UNDP is committed to helping, and we're working with a number of African governments to define first and apply the principles of a just and equitable energy transition and access that is specific to the country. There is no one size fits all. And so what we work with governments is a more customized sort of approach to access. What is the story around access? I'm an energy person, and I've been looking at this issue of access for many, many years, decades even. I don't want to age myself, but in fact, for rather a long time. The issue about access is not simply that people are not getting electricity, but it's also to look at the reasons why. And today, as one of the speakers before said, that in Africa, one of the ways to deal with access is to renovate, restructure, revitalize the existing energy infrastructure that there is already. That is, however, quite capital intensive, and that is also long term in terms of getting that done. So what is UNDP working on in parallel? It's really the decentralized energy infrastructure model, and many of you talked about that. What does decentralization look like? What are the risks? What are the benefits? Our flagship program is something called the Africa Mini Grid program, which many of you may be quite aware of. It is basically, the mandate is to try to close the energy access at scale on the continent. It aims to improve financial viability of renewable energy mini grids in 21 countries, encouraging private investment, bringing about lower tariffs, and also expanding service. It's a $50 million, I believe, facility overall, funded by the Global Environment Facility, and it's implemented by UNDP. I think the 21 countries, and this is an important thing to note, together host an estimated almost 400 million people. So when you look at that, 400 million people as a percentage of the almost 600 that lack access to electricity today, this is a big program. This is a big program that is, you know, if it works well, will achieve much of the access goal that we set for ourselves. Keep in mind, please, and as far as UNDP is concerned, we are seeing a switch actually globally, but also in Africa, from a centralized infrastructure energy model to a more decentralized one, just because of what some of you said, because of rural urban balances, because of the need to serve women in communities with no electricity who are using biomass or, you know, cooking fuels that are not healthful. So I think that decentralized energy models are something that that is going to take a much larger center stage than it has been so far. The second issue I'd like to talk about here is really the notion of human-centered development. Human-centered development or energy development, of course, is about access, but honestly, it's also about efficiency, and it's around productive use. And I think what, you know, when you talk about efficiency, whether they are mini grids or decentralized grids, or whether we're talking about main central grids, I think efficiency is as much a source of energy as any other source of energy. And this is something that is coming out in the work that we're doing, that efficient energy systems create an additional energy source. But also productive use, as some of you have mentioned, is very important. Solutions that promote productive energy use can increase incomes by up to 2.5 times, our work has shown. In East Africa, an estimated 1/3 of people who purchase solar home systems or rooftop solar extend their workday or boost enterprise activities, increasing earnings by an average of almost $50 per month. These are very important findings that point to the fact that productive energy use is as important as access and as important as just simply efficiency. I think productive use of electricity also has a positive feedback loop for distributed renewable energy solutions such as mini grids, because mini grids themselves, one of the things thrown against decentralized solutions is that they're inefficient. Well, the fact of the matter is that if you take into account the issue of productive energy use, it does allow optimization if you will, of the grid, and ultimately results in lower power generation costs and improved economics for the mini grid developers. Next, I'd like to talk about the gender issues in energy. Sheila, you spoke about it. Other speakers have also pointed to the fact that female participation in energy is very low world over. And the situation is very, very similar in Africa as well, unfortunately. Globally, for example, women only account for 22% of the traditional energy sector. Obviously, that is very low, and it's not acceptable. The percentages at management levels, or let's say influence levels, is significantly lower. If I remember the statistic, it's around 10 or 11%. Access to electricity can increase female labor force participation. The IMF estimates that in rural South Africa, for example, electrification increased female labor force, participation of females in the labor force by 9%. Another area that we look at as UNDP when we think of gender equality in energy is really what is the participation of women in energy policy. And unfortunately, an analysis of 192 national energy frameworks that we did shows that only a third, actually less than a third, include gender consideration. Balanced against this, I'm very happy to say that in UNDP's climate promise, which is really a flagship sort of climate initiative, in climate promise, which basically works with countries to create and enhance their NDCs, we find that I believe the statistic is 96% of the NDCs today have gender considerations, which is really something that we are working with countries to make sure that they incorporate in their NDCs, not only in the creation of the NDC, but also in the implementation plans and the underlying and downstream projects, etc. So where does that leave us when we talk about energy transition, just transition? Where should Africa and African countries go in terms of moving down a green and resilient pathway? Just stepping back a bit, unfortunately, some of you mentioned this, the war in Ukraine has tightened the energy market today. It has shifted it a lot. Some of the thinking around even decarbonization, and it's resulted in a significant increase in energy prices around the world. What is it, about 50% or so? Is the latest numbers that I have seen. What does that do to Africa, but to the world in general? On the one hand, it can cause a reversion to fossil fuel economies again, because of this notion of energy security and the need for that. But on the other hand, it can accelerate the transition toward alternative and renewable sources, in particular in countries that seek to increase energy security and resilience. What is the conundrum here? Africa must grow. Africa needs to grow, it needs to develop, it needs to create opportunities for the population and for the economies in general. So they do need to grow and have the appropriate energy to grow, but they must make sure that they do not fall into a situation of creating stranded assets, because as the world goes towards a greener reality, then some of these assets that may be developed today may become stranded assets. Having said that, some of you have mentioned there are transition fuels that one must look at in order to go along that pathway. Gas came up, I believe, as one of them. UNDP is very well cognizant of the fact that the net zero aim and goals constitutes an extremely ambitious transformation of the global, regional, and frankly, local energy systems all over the world, but particularly here. And a transition of this scale has to put society and people at its center. And when I look at, I think, Oscar, you mentioned that the energy matrix of Africa in general, only about a quarter of it is in renewable energy. And that is in stark contrast, actually, to the remarkable renewable energy potential that the continent has. Think about this. The continent today is arguably has the richest solar resources on Earth today, but it has installed only 5 gigawatts of solar power, which is less than 1% of the global total. That's pretty shocking when you really think about that. Some of you talked about wind power potential. It's huge in Africa, but there's just not enough installed capacity. The geothermal energy capacity from the East Africa Rift system in countries such as Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique, etc. I think, Mr. Abdallah, you mentioned this, is also very large, but not exploited enough yet. Hydropower came up, which is also, one of you mentioned huge hydropower resources. I think the Inga Dam in DRC is one of the examples that one can give in terms of harnessing hydropower energy. What this is showing is that a continent that has such enormous potential is not yet installing the adequate green energy or renewable energy capacity. And why is that? A couple of reasons. Some of you mentioned there's no finance. There's not adequate finance, at least there's some finance. Number two, you have to look at the enabling environment in which to bring this finance. And for me, that meeting of policy, enabling environment, and finance is crucial to moving forward on any sort of infrastructure plan. And I think if UNDP, for example, has in place, I think it's called de-risking renewable energy investment, or the DREI framework, which basically works with countries in identifying blocks and impediments in bringing in finance at scale into renewable energy, and what policies, what frameworks do you need in order to bring finance at scale into the energy sector. So I'd like to close with just simply saying the following, that in Africa, but in the rest of the world as well, it is crucial that we maintain our decarbonization objectives. But it is also crucial that depending on which part of the world, like Africa that we're talking about, we also maintain our growth objectives. So the balance will be between growth and development and decarbonization, and how you bring in the finance, the innovation, and by innovation, I mean both, of course, technologies and access to technologies, but also business models. Number three, the infrastructure and the appropriate infrastructure model in order to make sure the energy sector is resilient. And four, governance. By governance, I mean the policy environment, but I also mean the institutions required to maintain and put forward the policies and regulatory framework. So if you have those 4 or 5 things and you combine it with social inclusion and incentiveness, I think we have a plan for the world, but also for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. Thank you to all of our speakers for the important and pertinent points raised. It's very clear that the challenges and the risks are real and multifaceted, but so are the opportunities and the reasons for positivity, and that's come across very clearly today. So at this point in proceedings, I'll hand the floor back to our panel to discuss the important points raised further before we turn to questions. First, there'll be questions from the room, and then questions that have been received online. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hand the floor back to you.
I got distracted. Sorry.
Oh, my apologies.
No.
I tend to get distracted.
And any discussion that you would like to raise with each other, this is the time to do it.
Oh.
No, I'm just listening, madam. So let I join.
Your Excellency, are there any issues you would like to raise with the panel? Any particular points of discussion that you would like to go into further?
I think on my side, the issue of de-risking. Africa, with what's going on with the spillover of Ukraine war, the effects of that, and then the combination of debt distress or debt issues that we are facing as African countries, and even the difficulty to recover from COVID. It's a multiple issues. And so what opportunity is there in terms of really de-risking what support is there for the African countries to really be saved from this? Because we are talking about it, but what solutions are there?
Well, so if you, you brought two issues up. One, of course, is de-risking, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other is what you alluded to, which is really the fiscal space issue, especially when it comes to African countries. Energy is a very capital intensive activity. I think I mentioned that in some. So whatever we do in energy, which is the traditional energy infrastructure structures, those are capital intensive. So it's very hard to ask a country which has a lot of debt and very limited fiscal space to somehow put more money into this by raising debt. So one of the first things one has to do is try to figure out that many instruments that are now being developed in LASTA, such as debt for XYZ swaps, for example. So there's debt for nature swaps, there's debt for, there's various type of debt swap instruments that are being considered. These are not without risk, they're not without complexity, but people are trying to figure out how to deal with the issue of a huge debt burden. If you look around the world, I think Africa's average debt to GDP ratio is, Oscar, I want to say in the 60s, or 65, 70%. That's not very high, but that's the average, which means there's those with much higher and those with much lower. So there are some financial instruments that are being addressed. Now, when it comes to de-risking, again, when you unpack that, right, why doesn't finance flow at scale into countries, not just Africa, but anywhere? So there's public finance on the one hand, and then there's private finance. Public finance by nature or by design is limited because it has to be put into solid. How do you use every dollar of public finance to bring in other finance? That other finance typically is private finance. And when you look at private finance, they want a few things. It's not just return. When people talk to me about private finance, they think it's all about, it is, but it's about stability. It's about the knowledge that when they put money, 20-year money into an infrastructure energy project, that they will get it back at some point and that there's stability around the environment. So de-risking means putting in place policies, energy policies, putting in place public-private intervention policies. It means putting in place institutions that are able to work with external actors in putting together energy projects, etc. It also means putting in place financial instruments such as first loss guarantees or other types of guarantees, which are now, again, becoming very popular. They were popular 2 decades ago, but they're coming back again. Putting in place first loss guarantees and other guarantee facilities that at least partially mitigate the risk that investors and funders see in Africa. So that's what de-risking is. So our de-risking facility goes into a country, not facility, framework, goes into a country, sits with the government, tries to identify what the impediments are. Where do you have to change things a little bit, right, in order to bring financing at scale? I would like, just as a closing remark, if you look at around the world and you ask yourself what caused this explosion in renewable energy finance, not just Africa, anywhere. There was one policy instrument that was put in place, which was the feed-in tariff. It was a policy instrument. So people are considering instruments such as those, repurposing fossil fuel subsidies. So all this goes into the de-risking narrative. I'm going to stop, but maybe just have the moments to say.
Mr. Abdallah, is there something you'd like to say on the subject of de-risking?
Can you repeat again? The voice is not clear.
Mr. Abdallah, is there something that you would like to add to the discussion on de-risking?
Yeah, thank you very much. Actually, especially for de-risking, there are some specific technology that need de-risking. And actually, the African Union Commission, they have a very unique project in de-risking the geothermal energy in East Africa. Actually, it is giving grant. It's term of the grant so that they can support the upfront cost. So not all renewable energy is cheap. In somehow, some renewable energy, it needs some public support. And I think this is the experience of African Union. It shows that when the available grant for the developer, private and public, how the business can be supported and also support the government and the private sector to proceed with their project. So having said that, this is only for geothermal, which is very unique. But I think in terms of even for normal like solar energy and others, I think there are some de-risking may be necessary. But the most important is the regulatory framework and the policy. And when I see what the South Africa did in the last couple of years, it shows that the key point here, it is not only a de-risking, but to put in place the proper environment which can attract the private and public. And I think this is my contribution on this one.
Hello, could I say something? This is Sheila. Thank you very much. I've also been looking at the chat function, and I pick up on one of the questions that talks about pressures that on the environment that are moving to maybe uses that we don't necessarily want to see, and that's the use of firewood. And those are putting pressures on the environment on the continent. And I have a question for particularly for our representatives from Nigeria and from Malawi. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think out of all the speakers, maybe I'm the one who focused on clean cooking. And I was wondering, when we look at the SDGs, particularly within the tag, both looking at the 2022 tracking SDG 7 energy progress report that is delivered by the custodian agencies, but also the work done by the SDG 7 tag that is convened by UNDP to review SDG 7 from a technical perspective and support the deliberations that are happening at the high-level political forum, that we find that under universal access to energy, there are two targets, electricity and clean cooking, and both have come under pressure. Current reports show that both have come under pressure, particularly with COVID and now with the other crises. But especially with clean cooking, that has been something that is a trend that we're not able to reverse. And this is didn't just start when COVID came, but was seen before. So my question is whether how much of a priority this is seen by our governments and what solutions they see. Two solutions that are being put on the table are, one, to scale up the level of investments and maybe to try and piggyback or even to match the type of funding that's going, for instance, through IDA loans, to try and match that with similar type of investments in clean cooking. I gave an example of what's happening under the Clean Investment Fund in Rwanda. But also the other solution that's been given is saying that the problem is that clean cooking has never really had a home in our public sector. Clean cooking is a public good. It's never really had a home in the public sector. And maybe to create clean cooking delivery units within our energy agencies. So I look forward to just some responses to some of the solutions that are being put out there, and just the whole question of clean cooking and the future of the energy transition on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Operachi, for that pertinent question.
Thank you so much. I just want to point out the fact that I reiterate the need for greater financial support to Africa in this transition of energy to renewable energy, given the fact that all want a clean and healthy planet, especially the oceans. And not to draw us back, I just want to say that given the discussion with respect to energy transition for sustainable development, in light of the climate and social economic concerns and how societies now produce and consume energy, this is intimately intertwined issues of sustainable development and other species of the UN high-level dialogue on energy. I wish to state that Nigeria opted out to be the global champion for energy transition, given our particularities and circumstances of being a developing country. And that is still energy poor from an electrification and affordable energy clean perspective. But to reach, Nigeria is rich for oil and natural resources, and in an era of global shift to renewable energy, the defunding of fossil fuels has become an issue. And importantly for us as a country, gas defunding is one of the issues. And even though we lack domestic financing and technological capacity for local content renewable energy development, we have abundance of gas that can be categorized and used in sustainable social, economic, and national development. However, Nigeria, despite the fact of this multifaceted challenges we face, we have not taken a back seat in putting into place concrete steps and plans for a sustainable energy transition that will be utilized into development in consistency with the limitations of our climate treaties. Nigeria is the first African country and one of the 2 countries in the world that have already developed its energy transition plan to clear targets, milestones, financial implications for implementation. I just want to throw this one out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador Bande, would you like to compliment?
I wanted to stay away from Nigerian discussion now. I have a different role.
Can I be in this point?
Of course, Mr. Abdallah, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, actually, and thank you, Sheila, for this question. In fact, 900 million without access to the clean cooking, it is really a scary number. And actually, it is not just about cooking, but we are destroying our forest. And having said that, we need to face this problem and to move the discussion from improve stuff to the practical solution. And I think the practical solution for me is to increase the accessibility of natural gas and LPG to the all household. Yes, it is a fossil fuel, but we need to make balance between climate change and also the fossil fuel. Africa is almost in zero emission, and having or hosting 900 million without access to the clean cooking, I think it is need a solution. And the only solution that I see, it is to invest heavily to provide access for LPG and natural gas to our people. And if we don't do that, I don't think we can fill this gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abdallah. Mr. Al-Manari, if you'd like to make the final point, and then we'll turn to questions in the interest of time.
Just on this point on clean cooking, thank you, Ms. Ogbarocha. I think that's a very important issue that you brought up. Everything I agree with, but it's also this connection to health. You know, there are, I can't remember the statistic, but it's something like 4 million women a year in Africa are affected health-wise because of non-clean cooking. And I think this is something that we must keep in mind when we, when we look at, how to bridge this urban-rural gap and this sort of gender gap, even when it comes to energy. Thank you.
Very important point.
Just a quick one as well. I think on the transition from fossil to natural gas, I think we need a productive capacity assessment for Africa, because how much are we able to produce and so be able to supply to our various countries? because some of us are landlocked. Malawi is landlocked. Everything has to be imported. So we better, with the current situation, we better import from within Africa than from outside Africa.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll just turn to questions. Are there any questions in the room? I believe we have 3 that have come in online. Sanju, would you like to present?
Pardon, Sir Excellencies. So we have 3 questions. The first is about how can women with disability be part of this energy transformation, since there are intersections that lead to higher risks. For example, those with albinism have a higher risk of skin cancer. And what can specifically be done to include those with disabilities? And this was asked specifically in the context of Nigeria. The second question is how can the outcome of this event help mobilize action for implementation of valuable inputs and suggestions harvested from this event at national and international levels? And secondly, how can attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets be changed to drive the results at national and international levels?
Thank you, Sanju. Ambassador.
With respect to the first question, we do not have different policies for able and disabled people. It's one policy for the country, and drive to ensure that women are involved is plus. Consideration is given to female gender in all aspects. Just some modifications, but just to say that there's no 2 policy for disabled and non-disabled. We have one policy to ensure that the gender policy we're talking about is taken on board in implementing policies. Thank you.
In some ways, this issue goes back to what Sheila was saying earlier about energy policies and leaving no one behind. It's a big and complex issue. The second question. Pardon me, Sheila. Absolutely, floor is yours.
Yes, no, just 1 or 2 statements to complement the response that has been given. Indeed, when we're looking at a leaving no one behind agenda, or when we're looking at addressing inequalities, we need to look at intersectionalities. And I think that's the key question that has been asked. So even if we're looking at women, or if we're looking at youth, how do we then look at how does that intersect with disability? How does that intersect with people from different ethnic or regional backgrounds? And where do we find that there are gaps that we need to address? And so I think when we have an inclusive, when we have an equitable agenda, then we certainly want to dedicate resources and to dedicate interventions that are really going to be intentional in closing some of these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And the second question, I believe, was about a call to action. What can this event do? In some ways, it's continuing this very important discussion. But would any of our panelists like to take that forwards? So it's a big question.
It's a great question. Thank you. And I think, well, I mean, I'd like to say that the UN system is the one place where initiatives, and whether they're already being implemented or they're in the creation stage, can be taken to the country level. And particularly UNDP, for example, has boots on the ground in 170 countries and territories, and we literally are able to take an idea and discuss it at the national as well as sub-national levels in order to see where the solutions are. So I think I think that's really the only way to bring some of these solutions and some of these discussions up to the levels where implementation is possible. I don't think we can. I'm completely convinced that we cannot just remain at a 35,000 foot level, meaning to have global architectures and global ambitions without actually bringing them down to the country level. So I think that's what I think. What do you think
No, I think certainly the discussions have to continue at the different levels. We have a common agenda here with the the Secretary General, and as we take it down to the country level, as you mentioned, we need to bring in these issues. And just to add on to the issue of inclusivity, I think what is clear in most of our development plans, we do not consider disability, persons with disability. If you check many of them, they do not integrate or mainstream issues of persons with disability. I think this is a real gap and we need to consider that. And if I could go to the third question on how attitudes and mindset could be changed, I think I mentioned in my statement that we do need education at all levels. We start from the basic, preschool even. The kids need to know already what is the importance of energy and what are clean energy and stuff like that. And we continue to the level, then we will not have major problems. And that's the only way we can change mindset. Otherwise, many people currently, governments in Africa are struggling to make people stop using firewood because they are used, it's traditional. So really, it needs to start from the beginning of people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That's a powerful call to action.
Hello.
Positive note to end today's discussions. Ms. Operacha, would you like to make one final point? And then we'll have
Yes, just to complement the excellent points that are coming through. And I guess now the discussion is really starting, but just to say that, you know, I think also I like the questions that are really becoming practical. And I think when we come practical, we come down to who is doing what. So identifying the roles of different stakeholders, I think is part of also translating commitments to what's happening on the ground. And here I'd just like to emphasize the role of grassroots organizations, of civil society organizations, working in partnership with our governments and with the private sector and with development partners and UN agencies can really be a powerful driver for changes, behavioral changes that we're talking about, changes in attitudes, building on aspirations, driving that political will, driving that public buy-in. And I think this is what COVID-19 has shown us, how we have to, different stakeholders have to come together to, to address crises beyond one key actor's capacity to deal with. So just to say, I think, yes, multi-stakeholder initiatives, bringing in civil society and grassroots to work with other partners are also key to translating, to delivering, to going from commitments to real actions to impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Operacha. One thing that's very clear is that our discussion here today is merely a preamble. So I look forward to more and continuing fruitful discussions. I think at this point in proceedings, I will hand the floor back to Mr. Garcia, who will sum up the points.
Well, it's a tough job to try to summarize because really I want to thank all the participants for their very insightful contributions to this important debate. And as you mentioned, energy is an enabler for sustainable development. And as such, all human needs need to be addressed, as Ambassador Agnes mentioned, because there is a threat to the democracies in the region if these issues are not fully addressed. So, and a number of you have addressed the need for more adequate policies and regulatory frameworks that would facilitate investment, that would facilitate access to renewable energy, but also that will be an opportunity to transition towards climate change adaptation and the national commitments of national policies to adequate these policies and regulations. But in addition to that, how to integrate the on-grids and off-grids schemas, how to really integrate the decentralized systems in an efficient way, in a way that will be conducive also to more manufacturing and production, in addition to addressing human needs. And for that, we need stronger institutions and capacity development. You have mentioned how important is the role of gender equality and women's empowerment in the capacity building initiatives, as well as in education. But we will not be able to transition without reducing the risks to investment in this de-risking, taking in a multi-stakeholder approach. That is what UNDP has been doing in various countries. And I think we need to continue moving that because of the mandate of governance that UNDP has and the ability to speak with so many actors, continue to do this. Additional financing mobilization is important. And the ambassador here has mentioned the figure of 400 billion just for Nigeria. So the challenge is big, but there are innovative financial instruments such as green bonds, blue bonds, and so on, or other type of tariffs that would allow for these investments to be channelized and see this crisis as a real opportunity for the region. I'll stop there because we have our posters providing some closing remarks. Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much indeed. I think let me again thank all the contributors to this really discussion. Also the host of the physical location, very beautiful place, without which, if there was no energy, certainly would not have held this meeting here. That's for sure. I think it's really for me important to underline that all issues, first of all, we are dealing with SDGs. And we have seen the connection between energy and all other SDGs. And so all SDGs are really connected. And you can see how, as an education myself, how will this work without education? So we have to create the knowledge to get to energy. We have to practice to get the experience to now guide policy. So these things are connected. And it's really important to appreciate. One, I like the point that being real, I mean, you cannot do energy transition when you do not giving any subsidies. However, you mention them, there will be subsidies. You don't go to a village and say, don't use firewood. And then they say, yes, we don't. So how would they eat? So there has to be something to support life as it is. And I'm glad reference has been made in this discussion to the current geopolitical tensions and its impact, not only on the continent, but around the world. And while this is going on, obviously it can spur us into thinking deeper as to how to be more efficient in use of what we have, but also to realize the importance of peace for everything else. Because really, at the center of this current situation is the whole question of the value of peace for all of us. And therefore, for energy, it's important to appreciate its own interconnections. Obviously, policy is important. If you're going to give subsidies, there has to be a policy, robust policy, undergirding that, otherwise it should be abused. It is the same issue. So what's important for the continent, and the point I think has been made very clearly, we are dealing with energy. Energy is an abstract. It is an issue of my need as an individual. The community has to have energy for educational, health, and other purposes. Look at how the pandemic, just one issue, has affected us all. We are still coming out of it after 2 years. So what I'm saying is that in relation to energy, we have to have policies that work at the village level, that must work at the level of a nation. Policies work at the regional level. And for Africa, the African Free Trade Area and the whole effort to integrate the continent through trade gives another opportunity to see that there's a market for energy, just like there's a market for everything else. That should make it easier to borrow and to sell products. And this is vitally important for the country. It will not happen the same day. And that's why I like the word we're dealing with the transition period. You cannot just disrupt how energy is used. All you do is simply show there are better ways in which we do this in a sustainable manner. Climate is really important. And I'm not speaking here in my capacity as a Nigerian envoy. This is being done, has been already done effectively by my colleague. But to say that we know, for example, conflict that we have experienced for the last 1 decade has been driven partly by climate change. And you can see now how we have now work with policies that are sensitive to the environment, sensitive to climate, and also are, of course, cost effective. Because a point has been made, which is really key. Who do you produce this energy for? Who uses it and for what purposes? And when you look at this, the whole question of the class structure, who has and who hasn't, is also implicated. So poverty eradication becomes also a key goal in all this discussion to do with energy. You can make energy accessible because it's available, but is it affordable? If I cannot afford it, it's not there. So these are elements that connect to, and I like the concept note talking of this is a threat, and energy then becomes a threat. More production with better energy and cheaper energy. So, and we also shift our thinking to just individual needs of electricity to production. Production is key because it's really a basis for improvement beyond the village, beyond the city, beyond the nation. Because production, I mean, you talk today about supply chain. There is no policy that you can do here. Any country, even big countries, are suffering because of supply chain. Because we have, since the 1700s, 1800s, we have a globalized world. And therefore, this supply chain, whatever policy you have, you do need peace to have this problem. Because no country is immune from this supply chain disruption, as we have seen. So this policy, therefore, must connect the city to the globe. Let me stop here so that I don't give a lecture. I just want to say this is a very rich discussion, and it should help us to appreciate levels of responsibility. Countries have responsibility for themselves, first and foremost. They also have responsibility to cooperate with us. That's why we're here at the UN. And we must still appreciate that the stakeholders are talking about involve all these layers. And an ability to share information and knowledge is always useful. And this platform has provided that. Let me stop. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that meaningful conclusion. That energy is the golden thread to achieve sustainable development goals. That concludes our discussion here today. Our thanks to our distinguished panelists for your excellent and important points and everything that was raised, and to everyone joining us in the room and online for your questions. Everyone in the room, we have some refreshments at the back, which we would invite you to enjoy. Maybe a little bit of energy after the rigors of debate. But thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you.